Welcome to Don't Let Burnout Singe Your Positive Outlook. This is a part of our 2023 Wellbeing series. A few C&E disclosures before you get started. The Hawaii State Center for Nursing is accredited as a provider of nursing continuing professional development by the American Nurses Credentialing Centers Commission on Accreditation. The Hawaii State Center for Nursing designates this activity for a maximum of 1 contact hour. To receive credit for this activity, participants must complete 100% of the learning activity and complete an evaluation form. Please remember to print or save your certificate upon completion of the evaluation. Your certificate will no longer be available once you close the window. This activity is non-clinical and is exempt from identifying, mitigating, and disclosing relevant financial relationships. These enduring materials are set to expire on December 31st, 2025. Please note that this presentation was previously recorded. Please disregard any reference to historical dates. Learner outcomes for this presentation. Understand the difference between burnout and stress. Recognize signs of burnout. Understand the science and importance of having a positive outlook, and identify methods to produce and maintain a positive outlook.
Hi, everyone. It's great to have such a good turnout. No pressure, right? All right. I'm going to share my screen. And at a point later in the presentation, there is a video. And so I may have to toggle screens a little bit. But let's get on with it. Okay, so as Leanne introduced me, thank you. I'm Elizabeth Berry. Many of you know me as Beth. I'm to reiterate the continuing education information. I have no conflicts of interest to disclose. Here's a little background about me for those of you who don't know me. My home state is South Carolina, where I attended the College of Charleston, Trident Technical College, and the University of South Carolina before ultimately earning my doctorate of nursing practice from Capella University. I've been a nurse for 16 years. My specialties include neurology and neuroscience-based nursing, as well as cardiology in intensive care units across 13 hospitals, and that's throughout the United States. Ultimately, I landed in Honolulu for an ICU travel nurse position at Straub Medical Center in 2014. Then I quickly found a home at Hawaii Pacific Health. Since that time, I have worked primarily in nursing education at Straub. I have also done a stint as an adjunct faculty member leading clinical rotations for the University of Hawaii Manoa's Gepin program for a few semesters. And most currently, I'm in the role of manager of employee well-being for the Hawaii Pacific Health Organization. So that brings me to our talk today, which will be a little interactive. You will need a sanitized pen, pencil, or marker, and a piece of paper. During these years of teaching healthcare workers and studying well-being in healthcare, I've learned quite a lot. Some of you may have heard parts of my presentation before, and yet at a time when the pandemic and other world events have stretched our healthcare systems to the max, I hope that my message serves as a reminder to encourage all healthcare workers to keep on keeping on. So how is burnout going to affect my positive outlook? Well, first, why wellness for healthcare professionals, and what are we up against? It's been reported that healthcare workers have high levels of stress that come from 3 main factors: the administrative burden of the healthcare system, the need to make difficult decisions under incredible pressure, and the devastating consequences that can result when a wrong decision is made. Breaking that down further, we're stressed by work overload, less time with patient interactions, too much time on documentation and electronic medical records, not enough time for personal life, constant change, exposure to death and human suffering, ethical conflicts, a sometimes culture of intimidation, and the ever-present stigmatization of asking for help, etc. Really, there are even more things I could list. So what is wellness? Well, it's the optimal state of health of individuals and groups. Wellness is generally used to mean a healthy balance of the mind, body, and spirit that results in an overall feeling of well-being. And that balance we speak of most is commonly referred to as work-life balance or work-life integration. And even more recently, I've heard people just condense it to life balance. And this is the concept of prioritizing between all of the things we have in our lives. In my college years, I had a mantra: everything in moderation, including moderation. Think about that. This was a funny thing to say back then because I had a full-time job, I was a full-time student, and I went to a party school. There was no moderation. It was a tough life, but I was resilient. Now in my 40s, it becomes easier to move away from that mentality because these days, honestly, I get tired. Eventually, we run out of steam. What happens when we run out of steam? Well, we get sick, we feel terrible, we're not our best healers for our patients, we're not the best team members to our colleagues, and often we're not the best husbands, wives, partners, mothers, fathers, etc. to our families and friends. With this in mind, I have graduated from my college mantra of everything in moderation, including moderation, to a lifestyle mantra of everything in moderation, end of sentence. A little wiser, I think. It may be a bit depressing to recognize that we are not invincible, but the truth is we really need limitations in order to fulfill the balance required for wellness. Otherwise, we will put off caring for ourselves in favor of other things, and the balance ultimately gets thrown out of whack. This behavior is something we have been doing for most of our professional lives. And so think about that. Most of us got to where we are today by putting off self-care in order to study hard and get into school. We put off vacation in favor of working long work hours, or to start a practice or prepare for a major exam, and the list goes on. Over time, who suffers from the putting off behavior? Ourselves, our families, our team members, and eventually our patients. So now is the time to rewire that behavior in order to create balance between our work lives and our personal lives. And the risk from long-term imbalance leads to devastating outcomes such as relationship challenges, substance abuse, illness associated with poor lifestyle choices, and even suicide. Stress sources become burnout. We lose empathy and ultimately become hopeless. So what can we do? What are practical ways to deal with the special stressors that affect healthcare professionals? Well, knowing what we know about burnout and work-related stress, there are a number of things we can do to combat the imbalance. And today I'm going to focus on positive outlook as well as empathy. The key takeaway is we must make conscious efforts to find balance, and to address a problem we are at high risk for, we must edit our behaviors. Here's a little bit about the difference between burnout and stress. They're not the same. Burnout may be the result of unrelenting stress, but it isn't the same as too much stress. Stress involves too many pressures that demand too much of us physically and psychologically. And the difference between a burned out person and a stressed out one is that stressed people can still imagine that if they can just get everything under control, they will feel better. You may ask yourselves why we're focusing on positive outlook. Well, your positive outlook is part of what makes up your emotional quotient, aka your emotional intelligence or emotional intelligence quotient. We have our IQ, our intelligence quotient, and our emotional quotient, our EQ. Your IQ is virtually static after adolescence, but some studies show you can marginally improve your IQ. In the meantime, we can actively work to improve our EQ. One way to improve your EQ is through self-management, and a subset of that includes positive outlook. Does anyone recognize this man? I can't see all of you. I'm looking over here. I see a couple of nods. All right. Oh, It's Larry David. So he's a popular American television star, best known for writing and producing the shows Seinfeld and Curb Your Enthusiasm. So one day, Larry went to a New York Knicks basketball game in Madison Square Garden. He joined about 20,000 other fans there. And at one point in the game, there was a lull, and the cameras showed Larry's image on a huge Jumbotron screen, and those 20,000 fans stood and cheered for him. He's that popular. But later, after the game, while walking through the parking lot, someone drove by in a car and yelled out, "Hey, Larry, you stink." For the next week, all Larry David could talk about or think about was that guy. What was it that made him say that? Why would he say that? Larry couldn't stop obsessing. Well, what Larry David lacked was positive outlook. In an evening that included cheering by thousands of people and one negative comment from just one person, he could only focus on the negative. So we want to avoid that. As we focus on positive outlook, I ask you to interact with this presentation, starting with, in a few words, enter in the chat. What comes to mind when you hear the words positive outlook? No Googling, use your critical thinking and knowledge skills, exercise those brains. I'm going to look at the chat and see if we get any bites. Optimistic, looking good, optimism, hope, seeing the good, living healthy, the glass half full, seeing the good. Yeah, I see a lot of the same kind of response is good. Feeling happy about yourself. I love it. Okay. So according to the definition, it's the ability to see the positive in people, situations, and events. I feel like you guys pretty much covered that. And it means persistence in pursuing goals despite setbacks and obstacles. So with a positive outlook, we can help ourselves as well as the people around us at work or in our social groups. Staying positive helps us remain focused and calm instead of being overwhelmed by the stressors of juggling all the things. So the concept of emotional contagion works for both positive thoughts and ideas and negative ones. We, of course, are leaning on positive attracts positive today, but equally and oppositely, negative attracts negative. In an emergency, we train our clinical employees on algorithms to help us keep behaviors, roles, and emotions streamlined as much as possible, because what can easily happen is an anxious team leader becomes contagious to the team, leading to more stressful anxiety in the room than already existed because it's an emergency. Emotional contagion first was characterized by Elaine Hatfield. It describes how people who observe the emotions and behaviors of another tend to copy those emotions and behaviors. For instance, when someone smiles happily around others, those around them are more likely to smile and feel happy. Have you ever taken a photograph of a group of people and find yourself smiling when you're telling them to smile? That's a little scotch of emotional contagion. And here's a fun fact. If you're not familiar with the work of Elaine Hatfield or who she is, she's not only the first person to characterize emotional contagion, but she has also been part of the psychology department at our very own UH Manoa. So feel free to take notes or feel welcomed to take notes. I'm going to talk about 10 exercises. If you want to just listen along, you can always email me after this presentation if you want this list of exercises for your prefrontal cortex. Because positivity is associated with the left side of your prefrontal cortex. Ways you can stimulate that. Number one is create a positive future story. Optimism is associated with rising levels of dopamine, which engages the brain. Number two is follow a sleep routine. Choose a pleasant activity that brings your day to a peaceful end and get adequate sleep, because that relates to your memory function. Deny the drama is number three. Avoid getting caught up in gossip. Drama fires up the amygdala. That gets the prefrontal cortex off its game. And instead consider meditation. Every time you bring your focus back to the breath, you are activating your prefrontal cortex. Number 4 is move more with sports, dance, martial arts, yoga, anything active. All active pursuits are good for this. Find ways to express gratitude is number 5. It serves both the person receiving gratitude and you, the person giving the gratitude, a double whammy, if you will. Number 6, create silly sentences, acronyms, and cartoons to help remember things. Pretty sure a lot of you have done this throughout nursing. We have all kinds of acronyms, and in school, there are plenty of funny ones to help us retain that information. What that does is it calls on the prefrontal cortex and executive functions to access working memory. So by integrating jokes, riddles, puns, you can learn to think flexibly by shifting between different meanings and associations of words. Who here plays, you can, by show of hands, who here plays Wordle or Hurdle or Nerdle? There are a bunch of them. There's also a pretty cool one called Semantle if you really want to give your brain an exercise. These are all games you can find on the internet to activate our beloved prefrontal cortex. Number 7, we got a few more here, is play. Make-believe play in particular strengthens executive functions. So consider playing make-believe with your kiddos, nieces, and nephews, or try creative writing. Number 8 is be of service and volunteer. The social and mental activity required to do that sends blood rushing to the prefrontal cortex. Number 9 is learn to juggle or any new engaging activity. You don't have to learn to juggle, but that's an example. Learning a new engaging activity fires off neurons in a positive way. Other activities might be dancing, music, and theater, which are all predicted to significantly strengthen executive function. And number 10 for these exercises is offer and receive physical contact. Hugs soothe the brain with calming inhibitory peptides, strengthening your prefrontal cortex. So a word about hugs. What are the benefits? This is science-based, guys. Did you know that hugging is extremely beneficial to our daily needs? Research states the following. First, we need around 8 hugs per day to reap the greatest benefits. 8. How many people have you hugged today? Have you considered the old heart-to-heart method where you hug right shoulder to right shoulder and then left side to kind of connect your hearts? That's 2 already. Next, hugs can help reduce stress by acting as a support mechanism. Also, hugs can make us happier while building trust and a sense of safety. And finally, hugs are a form of touch that can help us communicate and send messages to one another. Yet, just a safety precaution here. We must hug with caution in a pandemic and an active flu season. So try to take advantage of those in your immediate household and hug them. This includes also those in your social bubble and even your pets. Okay, so now we're going to do a little activity. All you need is a pen and paper. And this is one of those that especially some of the folks from the education team at Hawaii Pacific Health may have done this with me before. So what I need you to do is take out your pen and your paper. I'm going to give you 45 seconds to make a list. All right, and hang on, I'll tell you what the topic of the list is shortly. Let me set my timer. Okay. All right, everyone. You have 45 seconds to list things with wheels. Go. Keep on keeping on. You got this. Just 10 seconds left. Doesn't matter if I can read it, as long as you can read it. And writing utensils down, heads up. I'm watching. I see. Okay. Okay. All right. I believe you. Okay. So, you don't have to share. I know there are so many of us here. Oh, was reading some of the comments too. Great stuff, guys. So a lot of people are going to list like a car. Actually, let's enter it in the chat. So if you want to like put something that you wrote on your list, let's look at what people wrote. I'm checking out the chat. Airplane, stroller, skate. Oh, they're coming in high. The brain has wheels. That's great. A cooler, shopping cart. You guys are on it. Okay. So what this exercise is, traditionally, it shows that people in a positive mindset come up with more examples than people that have a negative mindset. So basically, your brain is working better whenever you're positive. You don't have to share specifically your whole list beyond, those of you who entered in the chat. Thank you for participating, all of you. But just think of this as a personal check-in to make note of your current mindset. Okay, here's another activity. All you need is your sanitized pen, pencil, or marker for this. And you're going to, if you can see me on the screen, you're going to hold it between your teeth horizontally for 20 seconds. So here we go. I know it feels silly, but just keep doing it. Okay, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ooh, it's hard to talk and do that. Okay, pens or pencils down. Okay, so how do you feel? What do you think this action did? You can enter in the chat. I see a smiley face. That's it. Makes a smile. Good. It's so simple. It forces a smile. Someone said, made me think I am goofy. That's great. Because the silliness that we spoke about earlier, that's firing the prefrontal cortex. I love it. So yes, this activity you could do if you're having a down day, take 20 seconds and hold a pen in between your teeth, because it's a cognitive exercise that can increase dopamine and help with creativity and global thinking, as well as a positive outlook. If you did that in the middle of your day after like a tough meeting, then you kind of are taking a moment to reset. This third activity is more personal. You can just follow along, or if you'd like to write this down on paper, I'm not going to take a whole bunch of time for this one. You could type this out or perhaps just think about each thing on the slide as I go through it. So first, think of a situation when you felt anxious or cynical. The situation can be in your work life or outside of work. Okay, so once you've thought of that, you consider, was your anxiety or your cynicism justified? Just a sidebar before I continue. However you feel about things are always valid. Your feelings are valid, even if people tell you otherwise. And we'll get into that more when I speak about empathy. But, a self-check for this is, was your anxiety or cynicism justified? Is there an alternative response you could have had to the situation that made you feel anxious or cynical? And then when a response to anything involves anxiety and fear, what do you feel you're able to do? Usually we get blocked. And so how does that compare to what you feel when you're able to do something as your reaction is a positive response? So there's some food for thought about reframing whenever you're going through tough stuff. If any of you have ever heard of the change cycle, that's something else I can share. Allison Zecca introduced that to us at Hawaii Pacific Health. And it's kind of like the grief cycle. Whenever you have stress or something that's making you feel anxious or cynical, it's like going through different steps of sadness, anger, fear, discomfort before you can finish the cycle. And just like with grieving, and in change and in anxious situations, you can backflow into different parts of that cycle. It doesn't always go forward. So just some food for thought. We're not going to debrief today for the sake of time, but if you do any of these activities with your work teams or other groups, always remember to debrief. Allow people to share if they would like to. You'll find, especially within activity number 3, that many of us think about these concepts in a similar way. Moving to empathy. Empathy, or more importantly, positive empathy. You may or may not have heard of that distinction. It's inspired by your positive outlook, according to the theory of positive psychology. Having empathy is also part of your emotional quotient or intelligence, your EQ, through the skill set of social awareness. So having that social awareness to be empathetic to others. Positive empathy, in particular, is a type of empathy response that focuses on a person's hidden message of desire for a better life, was hypothesized to increase the expression of positive emotions, approach goals and strengths, and to communicate equivalent understanding when compared to traditional empathy. So here's another time when you can interact again through the chat. In a few words, enter in the chat what comes to mind when you hear the word empathy. Compassion, understanding how someone feels, another compassion, feeling other people's pain, being loving, putting yourself in someone else's shoes, supporting, caring, dual perspective, being emotionally present. I love it. Great examples. In essence, it is the ability to hear and understand others' thoughts, feelings, and concerns, even when partly expressed or unspoken. People with empathy can appreciate not only what people are saying, but also why they are saying it. As healthcare workers with empathy, you likely always knew demonstrating empathy is positive for the other person, but new research demonstrates, wait for it, its importance for everything from innovation to retention. Retention is that word that we're really working on in all of our different industries right now, is retaining employees due to short staffing. So empathy can help with that too. Okay, so next is the video. I'm not sure if it will play, so I'm going to stop sharing.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. Yeah. And we do it all the time because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So I had a miscarriage. At least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now. I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
Great. Thank you for sharing, Leanne. And I'll go back to my presentation. Okay. Okay. So if you haven't seen that video from Brené Brown on empathy, it's so cute, I think, and it's a profound cartoon that demonstrates the difference between empathy and sympathy. It's only 3 minutes, and I've seen it before. If you have, I hope you enjoyed it again. It's worth 3 minutes every now and again to look at that one. Okay, so SUDS. What is SUDS? Well, Brené Brown's empathy video touched on a few SUDS, or empathy busters. So the first S is solving the problem. An example is, I'll fix it, I'll talk to her, I'll get you a new one. Many people make this mistake when trying to comfort a friend. It's common to think everything would be fine if we could just solve the problem. Problem solving is a useful skill, but the timing has to be right. So what is helpful initially when another person is upset or simply expressing is that you simply express empathy, validate the other person's feelings, like I mentioned earlier, and invite them to talk about their feelings. Rushing to solve the other person's problems often makes a person feel as if their feelings are being dismissed or invalidated. The U in SUDS is unsolicited advice. Oh boy. My partner at home sometimes would give me unsolicited advice when I just wanted to vent. So quickly I nipped that in the bud and said, this is one of those times. I'm just venting. Please don't give me advice. And I'm lucky that he honors that boundary. And he's like, is this one of those times, or what are we supposed to do here? So an example of unsolicited advice is like, well, if I were you, or I think you should, or why don't you just? Again, offering advice right off the bat is not usually going to be helpful or welcomed by a friend who's hurting. Instead, wait for advice to be sought. In the meantime, express empathy and actively listen. Just be there. The D in SUDS is dismissing feelings. Examples are, it's not a big deal. You shouldn't feel that way. I'll get over it. That's no reason to be upset. Well, this response makes it seem as though the person is wrong for feeling a certain way. Their feelings aren't right or wrong in the end. Their feelings just are. And the last S in SUDS is for sarcasm. Examples, that's just such a tragedy. Like you saw the little deer in the video roll their eyes about, well, at least you had a marriage, right? Or another example, oh, it's just the end of the world, isn't it? Boo-hoo, what a shame. Well, sarcasm will make an upset friend feel put down or even misunderstood. This is an exercise you could use with your teams and with groups of people you work with, whether it's in a classroom or a department. It's like an empathy role play, and there are all these things other than empathy that we do often, kind of like the SUDS thing is just to pile on to that. So I'm going to go left to right, top to bottom, but I'll put empathizing as the last square. So I'll give you some examples, like if you have a person A that is the person that's hurting, And the B response is going to be one of these words up here. So we'll start with interrogating. The person A, I'm hurting, says, I can't get my mom to listen to my viewpoint. And person B says, what's the problem exactly? That's interrogating. One-upping. Person A, check out this bruise from my fall down the stairs. Person B, that's tiny. Look at what I got when I was hit by a bike. Advising. Person A is, I can't understand where all my money goes after I get paid. Person B says, I reckon you should create a budget. So that's advising. Correcting is, I think your essay about the greenhouse could be improved. And person B is like, it was about a glass house, not a greenhouse. I'll skip on down for the sake of time so that we have a little bit of time for questions. But if you want more information about these different empathy role play words, let me know, and I'll end on empathizing, which is usually the best choice. So person A says, my whole house is flooded and everything in it is soaked. And person B can say, do you feel stressed out and in need of some support? That's usually your best choice. Okay, so remember this concept from earlier in the presentation, emotional contagion, both positive and negative, from UH Manoa's Elaine Hatfield. Well, this works for empathy too. According to a study published in Evolutionary Biology journal, when empathy was introduced into decision making, it increased cooperation and even caused people to be more empathetic. So, emotional contagion, empathy fostered more empathy. Another study by Qualtrics found when leaders were perceived as being more empathetic, people reported greater levels of mental health. That's a crucial skill to be using right now if you are a leader of a team. Empathetic listening is vital to developing relationships. When it's successful, you're forming deeper connection with a client, a friend, a family member, or a colleague, both emotionally and intellectually. So remember to listen well, listen actively, learn to be patient and not interrupt, even if you disagree with what's being said. 5 quick steps to empathetic listening would be take a step in their shoes, so to speak. Fact check your interpretations or personal biases. Always give your full attention, clarify what they've said, and clarify what you have said. Here's another sample of an activity that you could do with a group or just think about for your own positive outlook and empathy. And it's a way to help you get away from burnout. So person A would choose a modern day object. It's called the 500 years ago activity. The person A would choose a modern day object from their workspace, personal bag, lunchbox, etc., and not reveal it to person B. And then person B can ask questions to help them guess what this object is, but they must frame them as though they are from a time like 500 years ago without technology or the comforts of modern life. If you had a bigger group and you incorporated observers, they may consider opportunities where communication could be clearer, and your groups can take turns in the various roles so everybody gets to experience each perspective. And that's another one where you want to make sure you debrief with thoughtful statements like, describe how it felt to explain something to another person with a very different perspective. Or as the listener, explain what it was like to listen while being in the mind of someone other than themselves. This role play activity helps develop empathy by encouraging the speaker to use language suited to the listener and for the listener to imagine themselves in another role. This is just a side note. Have any of you heard of this movie called An American Pickle? It's on HBO Max. That's not a plug or anything. No conflicts of interest here, I promise. But this movie is so funny. It's a great example of the 500 years ago activity, I think. So a great example of the activity is depicted in this 2020 American comedy drama called An American Pickle. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. It was written by a man named Simon Rich, based on his short story from 2013 called Sell Out. The film stars Seth Rogen, a funny guy most of you've heard of, I'm sure. And he is an Eastern European Jewish immigrant who gets preserved in a vat of pickles. It's kind of silly. And he wakes up a whole century later in modern day New York City, attempting to fit in with the assistance of his last remaining descendant, also played by Seth Rogen in modern day. It's pretty good, and I think it's a good example of that 500 years ago activity. Okay, so on to empathetic responses. These are some good examples of things that you could say maybe when you don't quite know what to say, like Brené Brown mentioned. I'm so sorry this happened to you. Perhaps if it's true and you feel that way, you might say that would upset me too, or I want to thank you for being open with me and honest. Brené Brown also says empathy is the antidote to shame. It contributes to positive relationships and organizational cultures, and it also drives results. Empathy may not be a brand new skill, but it has a new level of importance based on research. And that fresh research makes it especially clear how empathy is the emotional intelligence skill to develop and demonstrate now and in the future of our work. So remember, to best use the skill of empathy, it's important to work on your positive outlook, trying to tie it all up in a bow here because they're super connected. Ask yourself, what can you do to promote a positive outlook in your day-to-day work? What could you do to promote a positive outlook among the team you lead or the colleagues you work alongside or your friend group? Both of these skill sets are involved in developing your emotional intelligence, as mentioned, and combating the challenge of burnout in the end. Don't forget about gratitude, as mentioned earlier. It's one of those prefrontal cortex activators. It's connected to positive outlook, and it's got that double whammy of celebrating others, which can positively change your mood while you're actively offering positivity to them. Here are a list of my references from this presentation. And I'm open for any questions from the group. You could also email me at elizabeth.berry@hawaiipacifichealth.org. You can call me Beth. And I just thank you so much for your time and keep it positive, people. Any questions? I'll look at the chat or you could come off of mute. I see some thank yous. Absolutely. My pleasure. And I'm grateful that all of you signed on today to be a part of this presentation. Oh, Carrie, I see a hand up. I'm going to stop
Beth.
sharing. Hi.
I have a question.
Okay.
I strive to be an empathetic person,
Mm-hmm.
but I also have a really bad temper.
Okay.
So I frequently find myself in situations where I am in some sort of a situation at work and something somebody said, somebody did, or whatever else just sends me through the roof. And I'm trying to have a productive, empathetic response to the situation. Do you have any suggestions for how I kind of catch myself and rein back that first initial like bad temper response so that I can be more empathetic? Do you have any thoughts about that?
I do. That's a good one. I can imagine everyone has struggled with that at some point. Because communication is probably one of the biggest challenges we have. My recommendation would come from a couple mentors of mine who, and honestly, one of them's on the call. I won't call her out, but so you have to take a little bit of time first and decide, is this something that requires immediate action? or is this a situation that I need to let breathe? So if you're really fiery, time is actually going to allow you to give the best emotionally intelligent response. Because here's what happens when we get fired up. Think of a angry thought coming up your spine, and your logic box is up here, but your emotional box is here. And that thought has to get through the emotions to be able to answer something in a logical, professional, often, and thoughtful way without the emotion. I'm guilty of it. I get it. It's not always easy to do, but if you I find myself, if I think of it in a physiological way, it's like, whoa, I am right here and I am pissed. And so I'm going to step away. I'm going to do something that makes me feel good. Or I might even call someone and vent. And hopefully it's an empathetic person that's not going to give you advice immediately. Or maybe it's one of those times you need advice. But do something to separate yourself if you're stuck in that anger reactive phase, and let it breathe. And then if it's something that's urgent and you feel very passionate about, but you think you can get your emotional response in check enough to communicate clearly, then maybe you don't need to give it so much time. But you got to understand that our emotions can cloud that clarity sometimes, and we might not come across with the response that we're trying to get the other person to hear, because they're just hearing "rawr," right? I hope that's helpful.
That was super helpful, that metaphor. Thank
Yeah,
you.
good. Just visualize that thought traveling up, and you're like, it's got to get to the front. Anyone else? Questions? I'm scrolling through the pages. I don't see any hands up, but you're welcome to come off mute. I see a lot of really nice comments in the chat. Oh, someone said, stop, challenge, choose. So that's a good way to decide, am I going to face this thing that has angered me and choose to speak now, or, am I going to let it breathe? Lots of great thank yous. You guys are really filling my cup and helping my positive outlook for certain. So thank you back. Okay. Well, Leanne, I'll hand it back over to you. And thanks, Hawaii State Center for Nursing, for inviting me to speak today and kick off this series. I look forward to attending in the months to come.
Thank you, Beth, for a wonderful presentation. To receive continuing nursing education contact hours, please click the link to the evaluation in the video description below. When the evaluation opens, you will be prompted for a password. Enter the following password, remembering that it is case sensitive. Upon completion of the evaluation, please print or screenshot your certificate. Thank you so much for joining us today. We hope to see you at our future events.